Assalamu alaikum everyone, I am Ayesha Syed and in today's video I'm going to be introducing a book. With the ongoing situation in Gaza, a lot of people are becoming curious to know what is going on there. What is the history of that place and what is the history of the atrocities going on there. People are turning towards traditional media and also social media to learn about the facts and figures of that place. But in today's day and age, when there is an extreme bombardment of information from left and right, how do we ascertain what we are reading and what we are learning about is the truth and not the false? And how do we ascertain that what we are reading is not a myth? So in today's video, the book that I'm going to be introducing is called 10 Myths About Israel, and it is written by Ilan Pappe. The book was first published in 2017. It is a pretty short and simple book comprising only of 211 pages, and the author, Ilan Pappe, is an Israeli Jew now residing in Britain. 10 Myths About Israel is divided into 3 parts. The first part is called The Fallacies of the Past, and it is further subdivided into 6 chapters. The second part of the book is called Fallacies of the Present, and it is further subdivided into 3 different chapters. And part number 3, the final part, is called Looking Ahead, and it only comprises of 1 chapter, and the book concludes with a conclusion at the end. As the title suggests, the book talks about 10 pretty common myths about Israel, and the author in the book tries to debunk those myths by sharing actual facts and figures and historical data with the audience, in a way that it sort of changes the perspective around the entire narrative that is built about this situation that is going on in Gaza right now. At the beginning of the book, in the preface itself, the writer mentions that it is not a balanced book at all. Rather, it is his humble attempt to redress the balance of power on behalf of the colonized, occupied, and oppressed Palestinians. Some of the things that this book touches upon are historical revisionism, human rights and justice, narrative and identity, and also the role of international community. Let's move forward and take a look at the 10 myths that the author has talked about. Ilan Pappe says the Israeli government has tried to change the narrative and change the history of that place and tried to sort of mold the narratives and mold the minds of the people according to these myths, so that what is prevalently known today is a myth, not actual facts. And the actual Palestinian history has been buried under these myths. So he has tried his level best to do justice with all of the facts and figures and sort of tried to change the perspective of the narrative that is prevalent in today's time. In part 1 of the book, the author talks about the fallacies of the past, and as I mentioned earlier, it comprises of 6 myths, 6 different chapters that this part is subdivided into. The first myth is Palestine was an empty land. According to Israeli sources, the Palestinian land was completely barren and it didn't have anything at all. No humans, no fertility, nothing at all. And according to sources, this land was found and cultivated and fertile after the arrival of Zionists. However, the counter-argument to that shows that Palestine was already an established and thriving land with people in it, and it was comprising of Palestinians who were Arab Muslims, Christians, and Jews. And everybody used to live in harmony. Moving on to myth number 2, it says the Jews were a people without a land. So basically, Jews were sort of people who didn't have any piece of land. There are a lot of narratives that claim that Jews were the actual inhabitants of the Palestinian land. And according to them, when the Jews were forcefully removed from Palestine during the Roman Empire, the Jews that later on went and settled into the land of Palestine in 1882 were the same descendants of those Jews. So basically, the land belongs to them. The author has gone in depth in this chapter and from historical perspective tried to answer all these questions. The third myth that the author talks about is Zionism is Judaism. Even today, if you scroll down on social media, you will come up to different posts where people say that being anti-Zionist doesn't mean anti-Semitic. Similarly, the author claims that Zionism has no whatsoever correlation with Judaism. Judaism and Zionism are both different, and the ideologies that Zionism is based on are completely different than what the ideologies of Judaism are. And this is not according to the author, but this is according to the rabbis. The author has tried to refute this equation through a historical assessment of Jewish attitudes towards Zionism. And he has also tried to analyze the Zionist manipulation of Judaism for colonialism and later on for strategic purposes. In this chapter, we also go to the very roots of Zionism and we understand how this movement, how this ideology came about and who was the founder of it and what was the thought process behind it all. The fourth myth that the author talks about is Zionism is not colonialism. As we already know that the land of Palestine was not empty, rather it had its own indigenous population there already. And Zionist leaders already knew that, but they didn't share this information with the settlers that they planned to send off to the land of Palestine. When the settlers decided to move and went there, they were shocked to see an already full-fledged population thriving there and cultivating the land and enjoying the fertility of the land. And according to them, the native Palestinians didn't have any right to live in that land because it belonged to them, because it was their homeland. According to the myth, Zionism is actually a liberal national liberation movement, but the counter-argument to that shows that it is actually a colonialist, rather a settler colonialist. And this project is actually pretty similar to what we have already seen in South Africa, in Australia, and in the Americas. Moving on to myth number 5, it says that the Palestinians voluntarily left their homeland in 1948. 1948 is the year of the Nakba, the Great Massacre. And according to this myth, the Palestinians there left voluntarily because they wanted to leave that place. In this chapter, the author has debunked this myth by sharing facts and figures of professional historiographers. This is also when the Palestinian refugee issue became an actual issue. 1948 was also the year when the policies of ethnic cleansing changed. The policies of expulsion were replaced by the policies of restricting Palestinians to their own villages. According to the author, it is of extreme importance to recognize the ethnic cleansing of 1948 and to recognize the fact that the happenings of 1948 was actually an ethnic cleansing operation. Furthermore, he says that without acknowledging the happenings of 1948, and if we continue undermining the happenings of 1948, the conflict between these two sides will continue on forever. Because according to him, the happenings of 1948 is actually the root cause of the conflict. Because it was actually when Israel took over and occupied 80% of the land of Palestine. The final myth of part 1 is the June 1967 war was a war of no choice. According to the myth, the war that happened in 1967 was of no choice, and Israel didn't have any choice but to fight. But according to the author, it was a pre-planned event. It was all pre-planned by Israel, and they wanted to get done with what was started in 1948 and what they couldn't achieve. And that was the total takeover of Palestine. The takeover of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank had been planned since 1948, and it did not cease until the historical opportunity offered by a reckless Egyptian decision in June 1967. And he further argues that the Israeli policies immediately after the occupation points towards the fact that Israel already suspected this outcome and it was prepared for it. We move on to part number 2 of the book, and it talks about fallacies of the present. As I mentioned earlier, it comprises of 3 sub-chapters. And the first myth in this chapter talks about the fact that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. The author questions in this chapter, is Israel a democratic state or is it not a democratic state? And he goes on and makes a case for the latter, that is, Israel is not a democratic state by the status of the Palestinians in the land. The author mentions something beautiful, and he says the litmus test of any democracy is the level of tolerance it is willing to extend towards the minorities living in it. It is such an important statement. In the 8th chapter of the book, the author talks about the Oslo mythologies. The Oslo Accord was signed in September 1993. In this chapter, the author makes us think if the Oslo Accord was actually a peace settlement and a peace accord that later on failed, or was it a successful ploy by the Israelis to deepen the occupation? In the 9th chapter, we talk about the Gaza mythologies, and the author applies the same logic and the same understanding to the Gaza mythologies as well, and what is happening in Gaza right now, even today. What is a widely known fact today is that the atrocities that are happening in Gaza are because of the presence of Hamas. However, the author tries to debunk this myth and takes us through a different perspective and a different narrative of what is happening in Gaza and also what has been happening in Gaza since the turn of last century. Finally, we move on to the last part of the book, looking ahead, and it only comprises of one myth, that is the two-state solution. According to the author, the ground realities are extremely different, and this two-state solution is not the way forward at all and will never be a peaceful settlement between the two communities. The book was written in 2017, and what has been happening since then is obviously not mentioned in the book, but the author has definitely predicted a lot of things according to the pattern that has been happening since the past, especially the attacks in Gaza. He has mentioned in the book that Israel will attack Gaza in 2020, but the world shut down in 2020. So what he has predicted in the book, we are now seeing in 2023, and even worse. The book is written in an extremely easy way. If you are a student of history, if you're not a student of history, if you are interested in history, or if you're not interested in history, this book will keep you hooked, because you will get to learn so much. You will not only get to learn about the different historical facts and figures, but also the entire propaganda and the entire basis of the myths that are widely known as facts in today's time. If you don't know anything about what is going on and you are looking forward to reading something and to gain a little bit more knowledge about what is going on, then this is a perfect book for you. If you already know a lot about what is going on, and if you follow a certain narrative and you are looking forward to reading something different, a different side of the story, then this book is also a must for you. I pray that the atrocities end soon and we see a peaceful and free Palestine. Please keep the people of Palestine in your prayers. With that note, we have come to the end of this video. Assalamu alaikum.